Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're doing a wheel bearing on a 2017 Subaru Forester. This vehicle only has 50,000 miles. That rear wheel bearing is noisy. So the first thing we're going to do is lift and support the vehicle, remove that rear wheel, and then we're going to take this axle nut off before we do anything. It is a 32mm nut, and then we can take the brake caliper off. You don't have to remove the caliper from the bracket. Go ahead and take the whole bracket off as an assembly. There are two 14mm nuts to do that. And then I just set the caliper up on top of the upper control arm. And if you guys are new here, I have quite a few Subaru videos, so if you want to check that out, there'll be a playlist linked down below. You may want to subscribe in case I come out with future videos on your Subaru or a similar Subaru model. Now that the brake caliper is off, we can remove the rear rotor. There are two holes that you can thread a 8mm by 125 bolt into, and it'll separate that rotor from the hub. Sometimes they're very tight. This one being a newer vehicle with low miles, it came off fairly easy. And now we have to take the wheel bearing bolts out. These come in from the back side. They are fairly close to the axle. They are 14mm and there are 4 of them. So once you take those 4 bolts out, the wheel hub and wheel bearing assembly will be free. Sometimes the axle will be stuck in there and you'll have to use this puller assembly or something similar to separate the axle out of the wheel hub. You can also tap on it with a hammer and it may separate just fine. Once you have the wheel bearing separated from the axle, we can remove it from the knuckle assembly. It may come off with the backing plate. That's not a big deal. Just pop that wheel bearing out of the backing plate and we can reassemble it with the new wheel bearing. And also, just a quick note, I didn't use a slide hammer because if you use a slide hammer, the axle can slide out and hit the speed sensor, which is in that red circle. It is possible to remove the speed sensor from the top. It's just one bolt, but sometimes they're rusted in and you can damage them by removing them. So it's best to use a hub puller to push the axle out the back of the wheel bearing. And then when you go to reassemble the whole thing, just put the new bearing into the backing plate and then slide the whole thing back onto the axle. And then it may take a little bit of work to get the backing plate lined up with the bolt and then the wheel bearing lined up with the bolt. But once you get those lined up, I would start with one bolt, thread it in, but don't tighten it all the way down until you have all 4 of them threaded in most of the way. And if you are torquing these bolts or want to torque these bolts, the torque spec according to my service manual is 48 foot-pounds. Once that stuff's all tightened up, go ahead and put the axle nut back on and lightly tighten it down. I'm using an impact here, but I'm not tightening it too tight because we're going to torque it after we get the brakes put back together. So go ahead and throw that brake rotor back on, and then we can reinstall that caliper and bracket. The caliper mounting bolts are also torqued to 48 foot-pounds. Since I didn't separate the caliper from the bracket, I did not look up the spec for that. Now I did find it a little weird that the wheel bearing failed at 50,000 miles. The other side had a little bit of noise, but this side was definitely bad. The customer's going to wait a couple months, see if the other side gets worse before replacing it. In order to torque that center axle nut, you have to have someone else hold down the brake pedal or install a brake pedal depressor like I did, and that center axle nut torques to 140 foot-pounds. Once you have the axle nut torqued, we're going to use a punch to smash a little piece at the end of the axle nut where it lined up with the flat spot on the axle. Then we can put the wheel back on, and I'm going to run it up in the air again to test for the noise. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe, click the bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.